Thanks very much. Can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and pay my respects to their elders both past and present. Thank you very much for the invitation. On behalf of Bill Shorten, can I just say this to you? Do not give up. Do not give up on your workers, the members of your unions and your industries, because Labor is entirely behind you. Entirely behind you. Can I also acknowledge, of course, Stephen Jones and Sharon Bird, federal colleagues of mine who, of course, represent so magnificently the Illawarra, a region which is going through its own challenges, of course, really not being provided sufficient support by the federal government. I just wanted to relay, I guess, my shock, firstly, at the way in which this government's gone about treating Australian workers. Now, you know, they've got a right to, they don't like unions. They can like them or dislike them. That's up to them. But no government in this land has a right to tear down industries because they want to hurt unions. No government has a right to turn their back on Australian workers because somehow they think it's going to hurt unions. And I'm afraid that seems to be the modus operandi of this government. You might remember a few years ago, we had the former Treasurer, who's now the Ambassador to the United States, say that he was no longer going to support Holden. He was no longer going to support the car industry. And the day he made that threat to Holden to leave our shores, the following day they made a decision to leave, and we will see thousands of workers lose their job as a result of that contempt by this government. And indeed, of course, not just thousands that are directly employed by car makers, but the hundreds of thousands of people that are in the automotive parts industry that rely, of course, upon their income by working in that sector that's going to be very badly damaged when the car makers leave this country. And of course we see the same contempt towards the maritime industry and the steel industry by this government. 6 months ago I arrived in Devonport because Alexander Spirit, of course, a vessel was going to be sent to Singapore and the workers were going to be sacked. Now I got the opportunity to talk directly to those workers on that vessel. And quite frankly, I was ashamed. I was ashamed. We have differences in Canberra, but I was ashamed that there was a federal government that was willing to aid and abet a company to not only ask a crew, an Australian crew, to hand over the ship in Singapore, but to hand over their jobs as well. And that's effectively what happened with that ship, Alexander Spirit, 6 months ago. 3 weeks ago, as you know, we had 30 security guards raid a vessel in Portland, and escort the crew off that vessel to be replaced by foreign crew who could be paid as little as $2 an hour. In our territory, in this country, this is happening. So it's absolutely vital that you're here today. Vital that you're here today, and every day that you can be here to raise the voice for those workers being deprived of income. Because it's not just about the crew of MV Portland or Alexander Spirit. This is about the rights of workers in every part of this country, in every industry, that have a right to work, a right to be respected, a right to be able to bring home pay, a right to be able to come home safely after being in a safe workplace. These rights are inalienable for workers, and they're being completely treated with contempt by the current federal government. And of course, only 4 days ago in Newcastle, we had the police being engaged in escorting the crew off CSL Melbourne, another vessel. This is systematic. This is a systematic attack on the maritime industry. This is an attempt to destroy the maritime industry in this country for one reason only, because they pay decent working conditions in that industry. And it's an outrage. And we must stop this abuse by the government. So today, on behalf of the federal opposition, on behalf of Labor, on behalf of Bill Shorten, can I say that we stand with those workers in that industry. We were the ones, of course, in government that introduced the Coastal Trading Act. And let's just remember this. We introduced that act not just to protect employment, but to make sure that we protect the environment, to make sure that we protect our national security, to make sure that we protect the skills in this country, that we keep them here. There's a multi reasons why we actually embarked on that legislation. And you know what? This government doesn't like it, so it sought to repeal the legislation, and it failed. And I pay tribute to those, including the Greens and the Independents who voted with Labor to oppose that legislation. But what did the Minister for Employment do with her colleagues? Well, she just decided to treat the Senate with contempt and issue temporary licences to companies so that they can actually sack the crews off the vessels in the maritime industry. Total contempt for democracy and the will of the Senate, indeed the will of the Parliament, and she should stand condemned for that behaviour, because it's an outrageous attack upon workers who just want the right to work in their own country. In their own country. As Bill Shorten has said, and Anthony Albanese and many colleagues, including two that are here today, Steve and Sharon, this is work choices on water. This is actually subverting laws in order to destroy conditions of employment. But you know what? And you know this. It's not just happening in vessels around this country. It's happening in hospitality. It's happening in construction. It's happening in most, if not all, sectors of our labour market. And where the government is involved, it's aiding and abetting that assault. It's aiding and abetting that assault. They're looking to destroy penalty rates in this country. They want to introduce lax rules with respect to 457 visas, temporary work visas, that not only exploit the people that are on them, of course, but it puts downward pressure on wages and conditions for local workers. And indeed, it also undermines those good employers who are trying to do the right thing, because the rogue employers get a leg up because they abuse the system. This is bad policy, and it should be condemned, and the conduct by the government should be censured, because it's an outrage, as I say, it is totally alien to what we believe in this country. So I really stand with you today. Labor stands with you today, and I do so, can I say, also with the steelworkers of the Illawarra and the efforts that they're putting in to make sure they represent their workers in a very difficult situation. I spoke to Steve and Sharon about this. I mean, we know that there are issues about commodity prices. We know there are issues, but where is the government providing support for the workforce in that situation? Absolutely absent, as Sharon has said. So we need to make sure that your voice, and indeed the people that you represent today, are heard loud and clear. We will not accept a government that will destroy employment conditions, undermine employment security, and make it impossible for people to get a decent wage. We will not support the abuse that's occurring in the maritime industry and other sectors of our labour market and our economy. We need to make sure we get rid of this government. This is a government that is clearly focused on attacking unions and workers, not concerned about the massive underpayments by companies, not concerned about sham contracting, not concerned about phoenixing of companies, not concerned about any abuse, intentional abuse in many cases by employers, only focused and obsessed on attacking unions. Well, your attendance here today says we're not going to accept that. We'll fight until we win this thing so that we have Australian crew being paid Australian wages on Australian vessels. Thanks very much. Yeah.